the big news in Washington, D.C. is that Congress just passed the $1.9 trillion stimulus package. There are a lot of zeros with that. The headlines obviously are focusing on the impact to most Americans. A lot of people are going to be receiving another $1,400 check. And the goal, of course, is to stimulate the economy. However, there are some components in this legislation that specifically impact the healthcare industry and potentially impact healthcare stocks. So we're going to lead off talking about this stimulus package. So some of the things it has buried in the details of the legislation that impact healthcare. There's a $47.8 billion funding to improve the detection, diagnosis, tracing, and monitoring of COVID-19. There's $7.5 billion to promote, distribute, administer, monitor, and track COVID vaccines. There's a little over $6 billion to aid in the research and development, manufacturing, and production of new vaccines, as well as treatments for COVID-19 and for the U.S. to purchase those products. There's $1.75 billion in this bill to strengthen and expand activities and workforce related to genomic sequencing, analytics, and disease surveillance. There's $1 billion or so to strengthen vaccine confidence, and about $500 million for the FDA to continue its quick evaluations of COVID-19 vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. So, Brian, with all that being said, which COVID-19 stocks do you think might be the biggest winners from this latest $1.9 trillion stimulus package?
Yeah, I mean, clearly the money for the detection and diagnosis of COVID is going to help the testing companies. So I'm thinking Fulgent Genetics, ticker there's FLGT, and Quidel, ticker there's QDEL. There's certainly plenty of other ones, but those two are most reliant, I think, on COVID-19 testing right now. It's hard to see whether the vaccine makers, I'm thinking Moderna and Pfizer, are going to benefit from the money for administering the test since they've already pre-sold all their doses. But it'll get the shots in the arm quicker, but I'm not really sure if that's going to help the companies. But there is money for R&D for vaccines and for drugs, and so I think that could help. Maybe it helps the companies that are a little further behind. I don't know. I feel like the companies that are in the forefront are probably going to be the most likely to develop follow-on doses, for the variants rather than the companies that are further behind. Genomic sequencing, obviously, Illumina there would be a big beneficiary because they're selling the machines that do the genomic sequencing. And then the bolstering of the FDA budget, it seems like it might help all drug makers, maybe even non-COVID-19 companies, especially if the FDA is sort of fudging their budget a little bit and pulling money away from that to deal with all the COVID-19 things. Having more money would now allow them to spend that money helping other companies developing non-COVID-19 drugs and devices. They offer advice as people are as companies are in the process of developing their things. So companies getting more advice should be helpful to them in the long run.
Now, Brian, I reeled off some pretty big dollar amounts. How much do you think how much do you think this bill is really going to help these stocks? Is this a huge impact, a moderate impact, small impact? What do you say?
I mean, $1 billion is basically what a company makes off of a really good drug, right? So I don't think $1 billion, or $7 billion split between 7 companies is really going to make or break any of these companies. I think it's helpful, but not a complete game changer for any specific company would be my guess.
And if you were going to, I'm putting you on the spot here, Brian, but of the companies you mentioned, if you were just going to take a guess as to which single stock might be most most helped by this legislation, which one do you think might be the biggest winner?
Well, I think that the testing companies are the one that I'm most. It's the hardest to value because we just don't know how much testing there's going to be in the future, and so I think the money for that, and it's also the largest of the amounts that you listed, it's $47.8 billion that the government's going to throw into that. So I think that could, if that money results in testing going on longer, that's going to benefit the testing companies the most, because I think that they're in the most precarious situation where they don't know how long this huge amount of testing is going to last.
Yeah, that's a good answer, I think, because you and I have talked about Fulgent Genetics, as an example. That company had just a monster quarterly report recently, and the stock soared, but then gave up most of the gains. I think mainly because investors were concerned about how long the gravy train would go on with COVID-19 testing, and with the government pouring this much additional money into it, that's good news for companies like Fulgent.
And if you look at a chart like Quidel's, it's just this roller coaster of it goes up because there's a lot of testing, and then and there's vaccines and it goes down, and then we get another surge and it goes back up, and investors just don't know how to value it because they don't know how long it's going to last.